Happy New Year, everybody. I hope you're doing great. I've got one quick announcement before we get started. I want to thank some brand new Patreon supporters: Sophie Graff, Sarah Knight, Anthony James, Tim Letty, Nick Myers, Shad Murab, Isaac Morton, and Kristen G. All these folks went to mountainandprairie.com/Patreon and decided to support the podcast on either an annual or a monthly basis. If you're interested in learning more about that and other ways to support the podcast, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support. And if you don't want to support the podcast, but you still want to help it in a very, very small yet significant way, you can go to Apple Podcast and or Spotify and give it 5 stars. You don't need to worry about giving it 4 or 3. Or if you're going to give it 1 or 2, I don't even know why you would be listening at this point. You can just turn it off. But if you want to give it good reviews that really, really help, actually, go to either one of those things and give it 5 stars. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for the support and the interest and the enthusiasm and the encouragement. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Scott Hulet. Scott is a legendary writer, editor, and current creative director at the Surfer's Journal. He also has a new book titled Flow Violento, a Scott Hulet omnibus, which is a compilation of more than 30 years of his writing about surfing, fishing, travel, food, music, and more. If you subscribe to my book recommendations email, then you'll already know how much I love the book. Scott brings to life the cultures, waves, and landscapes of Latin America, using his unique blend of insights, humor, and perfectly crafted prose. If you're a fan of travel logs, adventure tales, and cultural immersion, I know you'll enjoy Flow Violento. Scott was born and raised in Southern California, and he's been writing for longer than he can even remember. Skating and surfing entered his life very early, as did travel to Mexico for surf trips. Through a deep commitment to the craft of both writing and surfing, he's been able to build a successful career that combines both. But for all his success, there have been some speed bumps along the way, including a string of health scares during his 50s that culminated with a very serious stroke. But after a ton of hard work and help from some inspiring medical professionals, Scott was able to make a full recovery and refocus his efforts on writing, traveling, and surfing. I've been a huge fan of the Surfer's Journal and Scott for many, many years, so I was honored that he took the time to chat with me about his life, work, and the new book. I called him just a few days before he took off to the Colombian Amazon for a fishing and research trip, and we had a fun chat about reading, writing, surfing, traveling, and more. Some of the topics include his hunting and gathering approach to reading, some of his favorite childhood books, his first foundational surfing and traveling experiences, moving to Hawaii after high school, becoming a professional writer, the importance of approaching new cultures with respect, his health scares and lessons learned, his surprising thoughts on social media, rules for travel, and much more. A big thanks to Scott for the conversation and for his decades of important work. And another big thanks to you for listening. Hope you enjoy. All right, Scott, I'm so excited to chat with you. As we were talking just before we started recording, our mutual buddy Rick introduced us, and without even knowing it, I'd been a fan of your work and work that you had a hand in for so many years. And so I'm really, really happy to be chatting with you. And I had just as much fun preparing for this and kind of finding old interviews with you and listening to some stuff. And I found a fairly recent interview that I wanted to kind of play off of to start out. And one thing is clear is that you love reading. And that's one thing we have in common is we both love reading, although I think you're more hardcore about it than I am. And you described yourself in an interview as being an active and engaged reader. And then you said you were a hunter and gatherer of writers and books, which I thought was such a cool way to put it. And so I was wondering if you could just talk a bit about your approach to reading.
Oh, thanks for having me, number one. And great launch point. Hunter and gatherer. That kind of speaks to hip hop's bin diving culture. And as a young reader, oftentimes that first presents at a library.
Yeah.
And libraries were foundational for me from the ages of 5 till 30. So that active discovery was just a blessing. And I never, ever wanted to be without access to surprise. And that still holds.
And I also heard in another interview, it was an awesome interview on the Surfers Journal podcast with Jamie Brisick, which I just love, and I love his work. And I almost didn't listen to it because I was like, man, I'm going to sound so dumb compared to you and Jamie Brisick asking questions. But I listened to it, and it was such a great interview, and I'll link to that. But early in that interview, you were talking about your love of writing and reading, and you mentioned something about how your dad played a role in telling you what to read and kind of teaching you what you should be reading. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that and kind of how that played out.
Yeah, I grew up surrounded by books, which was incredible. And my dad had a set of World Book encyclopedias that were lavishly illustrated, and the Harvard Classics, which was a shelf of obviously classics going back to Greco-Roman times to the founding of the country. Mm-hmm. So he would read those to me, and I ramped up rapidly thanks to that. Also, my dad loved poetry, and he memorized poems, and he would recite to me the poems of, for a young boy, Robert Service was foundational. And he had a little slim volume called 101 Great Poems. And he would read those to me, and he would from memory, and that left a mark.
That's super cool. When you're thinking about being a kid, like when I think about the books that meant so much to me, and now I've got 2 little girls, one of them's 9 and the other's 6, and they're both voracious readers, but they've started kind of diving into some of the books that meant a lot to me, like My Side of the Mountain and Hatchet, a lot of kind of mountain type books, Gary Paulson, that kind of thing. When you look back on your time as a kid, what authors were important to you?
My Side of the Mountain, I read at the right age. I was probably 9 years old, and that was a tout from my dad. The Yearling, about the Florida wilderness, the kind of the oak coast of Florida. That was adventure, obviously, and travel for a kid, for a young boy especially. Kind of lit the fuse.
Yeah, it's really cool watching my girls read them now, because like I read My Side of the Mountain out loud to my oldest, and now she's been reading it on her own, and then they both love Hatchet, and so I don't know, it's kind of like rediscovering them again as a 46-year-old. So you grew up in San Diego. How did your parents end up in San Diego? Did they move there from somewhere else, or were they born there as well?
My mother was. My dad was born in Iowa, and his dad and granddad came out during World War II towards the end, and set up camp in Coronado, kind of a islet in San Diego Bay. And they came out here for the defense industry. Yep. General Dynamics and Convair were there. And interesting, one of my favorite writers, a pulp guy, Jim Thompson, mysteries set in San Diego, lived on Pill Hill overlooking the Convair factory where he worked. So I have a connection to the place of San Diego through those kind of shared experiences.
And I know skateboarding was a big part of your childhood, and then surfing entered, if my internet research is correct, surfing entered in your early teens. But can you talk about your upbringing there? I mean, obviously, books were a big thing, but was the outdoors and the coast and the water always a big part of your kind of experience as a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. The hills in the backcountry of San Diego and local mountains and the coast, when we were lucky enough to live there, influenced me greatly, of course. And skating was it was quantum for me because it was so solo and so unorganized.
Yeah.
And it granted you driver's license, a way to be outside, sweating, chasing, hunting terrain, and bowls and reservoirs and pools. And I could hop on a bus with my skate and go all over San Diego County and experience places that I see in the nascent skate magazines. Mm-hmm. And that was influential.
If you don't mind me asking, I'm always curious. What kind of kid were you? Were you a good student, rule follower, or on the far other end of the spectrum, were you basically a juvenile delinquent, or were you somewhere in the middle?
Let me be fair and honest in my self-appraisal. I was kind of a screw up. I was a high flyer in anything literature or art, mm-hmm. and an F student in anything science or math. So I floundered in the course of the totality of education.
Yeah.
But I was autodidact. So I read 6 hours a day, kind of an odd bird in that way. But I was also an outside guy. And those experiences fed me in different ways and made me, what I am, for better or worse.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've gotten this question a million times, but what's your first memory of surfing? Like when did the bug bite you for good?
There's a few answers to that question. The first time I saw surfing and it really stuck was on a camping trip to Ventura County in Santa Barbara. Yeah. And it was an ice cold winter morning, almost too cold to sleep in our VW camper, our family unit. And I woke up at dawn and it was howling offshore wind, gorgeous avocation, the offshore spray. Mm-hmm. And I saw a couple guys in their early 20s suiting up to paddle out, and it was so cold, and they were obviously ecstatic and pumped and cussing and jeering each other. And it was so attractive to me as a 10-year-old. I knew there was something special going on. That was the first time I saw it. The first time I really felt it would have been I was maybe 12 or 13. And on a belly board, hard, foam and glass belly board.
Yeah.
And feeling that acceleration that you didn't feel body surfing. And that was exciting. And then the first time I ever stood up on a surfboard was at South Mission Jetty. And skating helped that tremendously. So you already had kind of a rudimentary style. And that felt like a resolution in a weird way. So like that.
So obviously you're right there, San Diego, close to Mexico. Mexico has become such a huge part of your life, and is so much of your book is about your adventures in Mexico. I was curious, as I would imagine as a teenager, you were heading down there a lot, but when was your first real kind of adventure or what at the time felt like an adventure, maybe with some buddies or in your mind, your first big kind of excursion into Mexico?
It was a very stock experience for a Southern California surfer. Your first overnight trip in Mexico, without parents, is always memorable and usually drunken and adventurous and hazardous because you're shit dumb.
Yeah.
You're lacking experience. You're exposed. And that's thrilling. And that was for me camping in the old olive grove on the bluff at Salce Puedes. Mm-hmm. And we were burglarized while we slept. They took our wetsuits and one surfboard, and we woke up in a state of disrepair and noticed what had happened. And we got waves that trip. It was everything you want from a Mexico trip packed into 28 hours. I was 17.
And were your folks pretty supportive of these adventures and surfing and skateboarding and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, for the most part. I had my head screwed on, and I was always granted a lot of freedom from the time I was 5. You know, mm-hmm. Those were the days where they kick you out the door on the weekend, and they'll see you maybe at 10 at night if you're 8 years old.
Isn't that crazy how much has changed? I mean, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
63, just turned. Yeah.
Okay. I'm turning 47 this week. And so
congrats.
And so it's just crazy. I don't feel like a elder, but when you start thinking about that kind of stuff and just like really like you get out of school and I spent grades 6 through 8 in a ditch in my neighborhood. Like I just in the ditch for like 3 years building dams and stuff. So anyway,
I get
flies. So you get out of high school, or you're coming up on high school graduation. What was your thought process? Because it seems like, you know, you've got an artistic mind. You love words. You love writing, reading, but the other stuff may not have been as much of a fit. You obviously love surfing. I mean, what was your kind of the calculus that you went through in your head about next steps, going to college, all that kind of stuff?
Well, it was instantaneous. The day I graduated, it was, I left for Hawaii.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Just took off?
Yeah.
One-way ticket?
One-way ticket, yeah. And I had one surfboard, shortboard, and I had maybe $1,200. I was going to work, and I had a buddy living there already with an apartment, and off I went.
Oh man, I did not really, and all the things I read and listened to, I did not hear that. So, talk to me about that. You roll up I guess you're 18, 17, 18.
Yeah.
Get there.
17. Yeah.
So, and I mean, again, I'm, amateur is probably an overstatement of my surfing ability, but from what I love it. I'm a fan, and that's a different ball game over there. Can you talk about both from maybe a cultural standpoint and just from straight up the difference in the waves? How was that adjustment for you?
Well, this was a time when that was what you did. All your elder cronies and guys you looked up to had been there, for years, off and on, traveling there for the season, and it was expected of you, even as a kind of rank plebe. And I did that, and I ran out of money in, month 3, and I got on food stamps. I was told how to do that, to enjoy the largesse of the Hawaiian government, and they allowed that for a month. Then they found me a job as a banquet houseman in Waikiki at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. So I would ride the bus, the Circle Island number 52 bus from Waimea Bay around the island to work the graveyard shift. And I did that for a couple months till they got wise and fired me. The waves themselves on the South Shore, where I was at first, were sublime. And the challenge wasn't the waves. It was the locals who had it on lockdown and were so insanely talented and loose jointed and free and fun that it was as much fun to study and hang out with them as it was to try and steal waves from them. The North Shore, I quickly found out, as I've written about in the past, I would never be a big wave guy. That became glaringly obvious. And I found I surfed every day for 6 months there. Mm-hmm. There were days I had to avoid. But the power, the rawness, every cliche from the surfing backstory was on offer and made apparent.
One of the things I've loved about your writing, particularly this book, is, you showed there's this level of humility that you seem to have where, you're able to go into these cultures that are outside of the norm for, the average white guy American. And it seems through respect and humility, you're able to kind of ingratiate yourself to the locals. And in situations where, you hear these horror stories about, crime in Mexico or whatever. And then you hear these stories about how hard it can be to be a white guy in the lineup in Hawaii. Yet it seems that you've been able to have very, very, very extremely positive experiences, because you just bring this level of respect and curiosity to it. I was curious if you could just speak more about about learning that at age 17, 18 in Hawaii, and kind of how you went about figuring out how to kind of balance that of being an outsider, but learning to approach these folks with respect so that you could learn from them and you could be a part of the community as much as that's possible.
Oh boy, there's nothing innate in me that allowed me to do that. It was a different time, and that was enforced. And if you stood out or made an ass of yourself, you'd get slapped. You'd get sent in. You'd get the fins torn out of your board. You'd better learn, and fast, where you fit into the hierarchy. And it was a very, very effective way to run a limited resource. And the power players, the guys who put in the time and had the skill, got the reward. And it's no longer that way. So any humility I have in me was maybe not beaten into me, but if you're observant and see what happens if you don't fall into line, you'll learn hard.
In my limited experience, I lived in Costa Rica for a year in Guanacaste, and we lived in a town called Brasilito, which is the nearest big surfing spot was Playa Grande, which is kind of near Tamarindo. But I remember like the third time I ever went out there, just walking through the little parking lot where everybody would park, and I saw a white guy getting his ass kicked hard. And so from then on, it was my main goal. Like, surfing was secondary to not getting my ass kicked. But it's amazing how effective seeing that is. I'm not saying that's how it should be, but it's very effective to keeping people respectful.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. And you'll learn that the guys getting their ass kicked generally called for it. Not always. There are exceptions to prove the rule are out there, but it's easy to keep your head down, keep your eyes open, and you'll learn.
I don't know. That's, again, I'm not, I don't think violence is the answer, but I don't know. Sometimes
it's not now. No, it's certain. Yeah, it's different now because, eyes and cameras are everywhere, and everyone's lawyer is on speed dial. So it's a different world. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's just different.
And so when did university become a goal?
Yeah, well, it was never a goal. It was kind of a default. I didn't have a real plan. Looking back, it would have been far better for me probably to join the military for the travel and the education. But I wasn't wired that way. I was in the generation that, for the most part, was the first generation not to follow their dad and granddad and serve. Yeah. And I was in that cadre, but I ended up, I I tested really well despite my grades, and was invited to do a summer school program leading to entry to a place called Colgate back east. And also I found a way to backdoor my way into the University of California system by going to junior college for a year first. And I did that. And then I went to UC Santa Barbara.
Nice.
For a spell, and then to UC San Diego for 2 years.
Very cool. I was just in Santa Barbara area a few months ago and kind of got lost and ended up in the campus of UC Santa Barbara. Man, that place is stunning. What a beautiful spot. So you get out of school. Let's fast forward a bit. I'm curious, how did writing become your vocation? You know, I mean, it was obviously had been important to you since you were as long as you could remember. I mean, I would imagine there's no time in your life where you don't remember not writing. But when did you realize, all right, I think I can make a go of this as my real job here?
Yeah, the transit from avocation to vocation happens when you get a paycheck.
Yeah.
If you'll allow me to define an obvious term. But my first check kind of lit that fuse. It had always been in the back of my mind, like, why hasn't this happened yet, despite not submitting anything? But that happened, and that opened my eyes. And I managed to merge my love for writing with surfing and magazining. I'd always been a magazine reader, from Ranger Rick and Boy's Life to Mad Magazine to the Harvard Lampoon to Spy to Esquire to Interview to the New Yorker, all of that. Mm-hmm. So when I saw an opportunity to write for the surfing press, I took it.
And what was the first paycheck you got that you remember?
Oh, it was for a little controlled circ newspaper style. Oh, let me backtrack. No, it was for a little arts and entertainment monthly in San Diego. And it was actually an assignment to write about a surfing event in nearby Del Mar.
And one of the things I noticed, I think it was in your interview with Jamie Brissick, you talked about some of your, that you spoke very kind of fondly of mentors, both in surfing and then in writing. And I'm curious, who were some of your early mentors, whether that's somebody that just kind of gave you the nod approval, like, all right, yeah, this is good, or people that actually helped you figure out the craft of writing these, because, obviously you became quite the mentor, editor, craftsman yourself. So like when you think back to those days, who sticks out as somebody who kind of either gave you the psychic approval that let you keep going, or really, really helped you become the craftsman that you are?
That's some wisdom in your framing of that, because there's two categories. First, the kind of go-ahead plays person to person came from two fellows in particular, a guy named Chris Ahrens and another fellow named Guy Motil in SoCal. And in a psychic way, your other question, that came from going to school as a student of good writing in surfing. And it was more apparent in the day than it is now, maybe. And I studied deeply people I eventually went to work with and for. And so those two influences kind of greased the skids for me.
And I'm curious when Steve Pesman first came into your consciousness, because I mean, obviously you guys have been friends and collaborators for so long, and he's such a legend. But I'm just curious, like when do you first remember coming across his work?
Well, I first saw his cut line as a publisher of Surfer magazine in the 70s. I was 14, 15, reading him. And also other writers of the day, Kevin Naughton, Drew Campion, Dale Hurd, Craig Stesick, people I'm friendly and friends with to this day.
So like when you started working with Steve, I mean, how was that? Because I mean, I've had that, not on that level, but like before I started this podcast, for example, like the historian Hampton Sides, he was one of my favorite authors, and I just loved everything he wrote. I really consider Blood and Thunder to be one of the things that really made me fall in love with the history of the American West, and really fall in love with history as a fun thing to read. Because before that, it had always been just kind of academic, and then all of a sudden, I'm on stage with him at an event, and I'm like, what the hell is happening here? Like I can't believe this. And then he turns out he's like an awesome guy on top of it. And we're friends now. And it's one of those things where I look back, I'm like, this is the strangest turn of events. And I don't understand how any of it happened. And so, I mean, it seems like, there's next thing you know, you're working with the guy that you used to read when you were 14 years old. I mean, what was that like?
It was amazing and natural and welcome. Yeah. So I made his acquaintance in my late 30s. Or no, late 20s maybe. And yeah, it was natural, and he was who he wrote. He was as described, and natural, garrulous, a little blue, funny, Minch-like, beatific.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful man.
For people who aren't familiar, I mean, obviously a lot of what I talk about is the Intermountain West, but I love Surfer's Journal so much, and I've been a subscriber for so long because I just feel like it captures so much more than surfing. I think surfing is kind of the constraints around it, and I think every creative endeavor needs some sort of constraints. But it's as art, as travel, as music, as food. It's kind of like, it's all the stuff that I'm interested in here on this podcast within the constraints of surfing. So, I'd love to hear just from your perspective, like how would you describe it to somebody who's never heard of it?
Oh boy.
It's tough.
Yeah. Right.
I've got a stack like 3 feet tall of those things, and I don't know that I could describe it, but you're the professional here.
Yeah, so-called. Yeah, it just tries to hold a mirror up to the culture of surfing. Like you said, all those silos or categories of interest, which are human interest and also cultural interest, from the art and writing and experience of surfing to the kind of grassroots history of the outsiders who had invented what we do. All told from kind of a uniquely Californian perspective, and but global in its interest and reach. It tries to be all those. Occasionally we succeed, occasionally enough to keep people at a 88% resubscription rate.
Oh yeah. I don't even hesitate. I've got it on auto subscribe. So it just continues to show up, and it's the best thing ever. When it does, I love it. And again, like I'm not a hardcore surfer, but as far as just, I think, even when I think about it from a business perspective, I think there's been this massive shift in the way the magazine business works. And it seems, I think about Outside Magazine, for example, and the transformation that has happened to that thing over the last 15 years. And it just seems like across the board, there are all these magazines that were once kind of iconic, and now they've just been absorbed into these big corporate giants. And Surfer's Journal, and then my friend Steve Casimiro at Adventure Journal, I feel like there are these few that have figured out a way to make money enough to stay in business, but not sell out, for lack of a better term. And so I was wondering if you just reflect on, as the magazine business at large has changed, how Surfer's Journal has kind of kept its true north, I guess.
Sure. Well, the 1990s represented kind of a high watermark for magazining in America. You had the Journal, the advent of kind of the commercial-free presentation of TSJ. But there were other titles doing their finest work in the 1990s and new titles cropping up also. There was a really, really sharp magazine called Icon that only managed to last for 5 years. They were very influential to me in the way I wanted to arrange departments and properties within the pages, front of the book, back of the book interest, without becoming short form pop. And the journal was the perfect foil for that attitude. And I think I brought some of that with me after my hire in 99. Nowadays, obviously the landscape has shrunk dramatically. And I personally have gone from holding some 35 magazine subscriptions monthly to my house to a scant handful because of the success, for lack of a better word, of new media. And I'm an adherent of, in particular, X, Twitter, because that allows me to custom edit a dream magazine into my feed, ignore the For You portion, all the Sturm und Drang and ugliness of social media, and really ferret down to the topics I'm into. And I love that.
I love hearing that you love it. You know, I think the kind of standard knee-jerk reaction now from everybody is just social media sucks. I hate it. And the fact that you've been able to get this tool, kind of customize this tool to add good value instead of bad. I mean, that's very inspiring to me.
Yeah. I was surprised myself by the efficacy and how easy it was to kind of custom tune favorite authors, musicians, artists, voices to my feed with links to long form sources. So, that's all upside to me.
That's very good. I've just been on such a anti-social media in my brain, just kind of looping out on that. So that's a good antidote just to calm down and think about it from the other side for a second. So
yeah. It's, it surprises my friends.
Well, there was one of the, in one of your chapters in the book, I think it was, the chapter was called The Peace. You were at the end, you're talking about when you come back from a trip down in Baja, and how when you turn on your phone, there's this kind of shock to the system, and your time in Baja is kind of a recharge from that. And I mean, is that I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that, disconnecting versus being locked in, even when you're being fed good stuff.
Yeah. I don't follow X when I'm abroad. I want to soak in the everything of it all. And that's still the case. And when you cross back and you boot up and you're overwhelmed with a raft of emails and considerations and miserable tasks, you're smacked in the face with the dark side of the immediacy of digital deployment. And that's why I wanted so desperately, like I said, to not be in the U.S. during the election month. And I couldn't pull it off due to some personal responsibilities. But it would have been really, really sweet to be out of the country for that period, just because of the noise. I don't give a stuff about politics. I'm interested in geopolitics always, in history, but national politics I really wanted to be away from. And you can still do that, like you and I were talking about. Just turn it off.
Yeah. Well, and that was another thing I picked up on in one of your interviews as I was preparing for this, and we're not going to go down the vortex of politics. But it seems that between your travels internationally and then your activities here in the U.S., whether that's surfing or fishing, that you're exposed to a really broad range of the population and a broad range of different ideas and different people coming from different places. And I personally, in this election cycle, I've been exposed this time around to a lot more diverse thought, people with different opinions, different thoughts. I started doing jujitsu at age 46, which I'm still not sure if that was a wise move or not. But one of the best things about it was this put me in very close contact, as in they're choking me, with a lot of guys that I normally wouldn't interact with in my day-to-day life. And I think as this election, panned out, a lot of those guys and me voted for different people, but they're good dudes. And I think it's very hard to demonize the other side when you know them that well and you've had these intimate experiences doing hard stuff together. I mean, do you think you've been able to handle it better just because you've got a broader perspective on things?
That's a great commentary. Yeah, it's like a go figure moment, Yeah, I come from coastal California, which is transited from, in my youth, a middle class place to very upper middle class, and has become a little stilted and prissy. And to experience fishing, both in California and in Mexico, that appeals to a different set of folk, outdoorsmen, not in the Teva sandal model, but in the blood in your bibs model. And so that's really good, getting to experience. It's like Christopher Hitchens opined in an interview debate when he said, "Ma'am, you strike me as someone who's never read an opposing argument to your position." And it's critical to hear people and hang out and drink and just humanize,
I do. It's been, I always try to keep an open mind, and I'm always happy when somebody can change my mind on something. I'm always looking to have my mind changed. If I'm thinking about something wrong or incompletely in an incomplete manner, whatever. But I really do think that's why I wasn't as hyped up as everybody else during this election cycle, because I know very well a lot of people who have different ideas about this stuff, and I know that they're good people. And it's just, I don't know, the way this stuff is just, that politics has become everything. It's crazy. But I'm going to change the subject now because we're on the
Excellent. Please. Yeah. I'll cycle us back to Mexico and the benefit of experiencing a broad strata of people. And Mexico and Latin America is really bifurcated between la gente, la plebada, regular folk, and the fresones, kind of the moneyed, yuppified, wealthier people. And there's little in the middle, but your entry point to both of those comes for me via surfing in the wilderness and fishing. And I love dancing between those poles.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a amazing way to think about it. I got a question about editing. And you're obviously spent so long at the Surfer's Journal as an editor. And this might be a rambling question. I'll try to verbalize it the best I can. But the Surfer's Journal, is this institution. And it's kind of everybody who subscribes to Surfer's Journal has this idea of what it is. And then there's you, who is an individual with your own style and your own ideas about writing. And then there's kind of this third factor, which would be a writer or a photographer who's writing or capturing photos for the journal. And I'm curious just how you go about editing for an institution like that. So where it's reflective of the institution's ideas, but also is reflective of your own style and your own experience, and kind of the balance between the two. Does that make any sense at all?
Absolutely. Yeah, you defined it well. You have to keep the interested the reader in mind at maybe 80% level, but spare 20% for the writer and really allow the writer to be himself, have a light hand, and trust your selection in his draft or pitch, and use that as your first filter, because you have to trust yourself. You're inviting him to play for a reason. And when he submits, don't stamp your shit all over it. Let him or her be him or her, and help where you can, but don't enforce a house style, for God's sakes, because that will quell any surprise.
I never thought about it that way, but that is one thing I love about the Surfer's Journal is you never know what you're going to get from one article to the next. There is, and maybe that is the style, is that it's always surprising to me from the actual subject of the articles down to the style of the writing. I don't know. I just love it. There may not be a straight up answer for this, but I'm curious in your mind, what makes the difference between a good piece of writing, let's say a good piece of surf writing, and a great piece of surf writing? Is there any, I mean, I would imagine it varies depending on authors, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
If I could coach that, even define it, my job would be so much easier. Yeah. You're generally poleaxed by a piece that comes out of nowhere and is such a fugue and so masterful that you wonder, where did that come from? Even if you knew the writer in the past, they can hit gears sometimes that just knocks your block off. And you know them when you see them, and you know it instantly, and you know the reader will too.
How much weight do you put in the muse versus nose to the grindstone? just sit down and write. How much, where do you sit on that spectrum?
Well, I'm lazy. So
I don't believe that.
No.
Your book proves you're not lazy.
No. I really am. And so I count on the muse, and I just don't count on her. I pursue her. I pray to her. I feed her. I cook for her. So that when she comes, she is in good spirits. And I absolutely believe in that, not in a woo-woo way, but in a classical way. You have to make yourself available to her. And I do. And
is part of your offering to the muse the respect of showing up at a certain time every day? Or is it, do you have a specific practice for your writing, or how does that, what does your practice look like?
Well, yeah, we're talking about craft now, and craft has to serve the individual in some way. And for me, that means working at night from volumes of notes to impart instant flavor, cheap flavor. Because if I have blackout notes to reference, to light off my mind, it makes it easy. So I write at night from 11 p.m. till 3 a.m. when I have
really?
Yeah, when I have a deadline pressing, and I'm usually unwilling to work until it's dangerously in violation of any sense of calendar propriety. You know?
That's impressive. I think
it's nothing to be proud of. Believe me,
it works though. I mean, you can't argue with the results.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I know you've talked about this a bit, but I know that through your 50s, it was quite a ride in a lot of ways, particularly with your health.
Really was.
I would love to hear if you could kind of give the folks listening to this kind of the insane, one after another kind of trials that you went through with your health in your 50s, because I think that there's a lot of lessons there and how you handled it and the lessons learned from it.
Oh, I don't know, Ed. I know you've had your ups and downs in the corpus category too. A lot of people have, many much worse than me. And, in any health event, I instantly retreat to, oh my God, I'm not in children's hospital, with a sick youngin', because that's truly where a man or woman is tested. As an adult, you just grit and bear it. But in my 50s, I was diagnosed with a stage 4 hepatitis that had been in my body for 30 years, evidently, and was killing me. And I went through a round of chemo and a treatment plan and was pulled off that when my blood crashed, but had the remarkable news that the short round of treatment worked and I would live. So that was good. And then a few months, couple of years later, they had to tear open my chest, pull out my heart, clip out a faulty valve, and sew in a bovine valve.
Wow.
And stitch me back up. And that was something, not nothing. And then the next year, I had a big time stroke, an ischemic stroke, and lost the use of the right side of my body, my faculty for speech, my balance. That was 4 years ago. And I recovered from that in fine fashion through hard work and some absolute angels on the therapy side. Mm-hmm. So those three events kind of soaked up a lot of my 50s. And I came out of that with a renewed sense of very selfish purpose. Mm-hmm. And that was to write and travel and try and do the best work I could with a sense of urgency that I never had.
You may not think about things this way, but I'm just curious because I had a pretty significant, to me, again, in the grand scheme of things, it was nothing, but, and I actually wouldn't trade it. It worked out. But when I had my health scare, I was on just a completely different path. I was, at the time, I thought it was what I was supposed to be doing, and I didn't necessarily hate it, but it was just like, this is what you do. And you go to a business school and you become, I was like going to be a real estate developer. Now I'm a conservation guy, but and so after I had that, it started a bunch of kind of thinking about things. And it was kind of the first domino in a very long line of dominoes that made me change things. And that's what led me to move to Costa Rica for a year. But so I had this big change, but it seemed, you were already doing exactly what you wanted to do and what you were put on this earth to do and what you're really good at. And so then this happens, how did you think about, how you wanted to go? You said a sense of urgency. Was there anything that you cut? You said, I'm done with this bullshit. I'm not doing this anymore. And then, what did you add? You said more travel and writing, but I'm just curious about the difference between pre-stroke Scott and post-stroke Scott.
Yeah, I get it. It's primarily mental and philosophical, as opposed to an excision of something I didn't want to do anymore. And I stopped taking things seriously, and counted on everything to work out like it does. And just made a goal to be in the places I love more and more and more, and not take no for an answer. Mm-hmm. And it's been a renaissance for me.
Well, I'm glad you're okay, man. That is a very strange thing, having your health kind of snatched out from under you for a while.
It was the back nature that took my measure a little bit. But everything works, and there's always someone in far, far more dire straits. So I count my blessings for sure.
Well, yeah, I'm so glad you're okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Back to your writing and editing and just all the things you've seen. There's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that have creative aspirations or are already in the creative world, in a variety of whether that's writing or music or visual arts, whatever. And I'm curious, with all the people that you've seen over the years in the writing world, how do people kind of differentiate themselves from others? Because I know, like with Outside Magazine, for example, they've got their online magazine, and they're and there's just a line out the door of people who will write stuff for their website, and they get paid $100 if they're lucky, and if they don't want to do it, there's somebody else out there. And I think there's this dream among creatives of being able to be so unique that people want to work with them because of who they are, not just because they can put words on the page or words on the internet. And I'm curious if you just have any insights from seeing so many extremely unique writers and what's allowed them to kind of find that voice that makes them so successful, if that question makes sense.
I think it is, from my experience, it's a resolution and an unwillingness to accept anything than serving A, their muse, and B, their craft. And money doesn't come into it. It has to at some point, but they're going to do it anyway, Yeah. And that was how I was, certainly, for one of a more solid example. Yeah, I would say just if you know it deep inside, know you are an artist, a musician, a writer beyond all else. You can't deny yourself.
Another question that is kind of connected to your optimism about and your positive answer about the internet. I think the internet has brought out this idea among people that all the cool places are discovered, and there's no point in trying to go anywhere because it's all too crowded. And that's a big thing with surfing, but I hear it across the board with fishing, with even mountain towns or whatever. All the secret places are gone. There's nowhere left to discover. And I know that you have a different perspective on that. That's not so negative. Can you share that?
Yeah. It's a big world, A. Things change, B. And C, the rapidity of the advent of digital consciousness and social media is gnarly. But point one, it is a big world, and with a little shift in your vision, what you need to complete your enjoyment of your pursuit, be it fishing, surfing, adventuring, trekking, whatever your kink is, it's still out there. So investigate via research, not word of mouth, not social, not magazines telling you what to do and where to go. Find out for yourself. Be curious. And the rewards are outrageous.
And along those lines, in one of the chapters in your book, I think it was called A Bass Continuum, you outlined you mentioned some rules for travel and just kind of overall kind of guidelines for traveling. And one of the first ones was you had a potential reading list of reading up beforehand. And could you share some of whether they're rules for travel that you would recommend to everybody or just rules for travel for yourself when you're getting ready to go out into one of these wide open places? What do you do? How do you prepare? And with reading being a part of it.
Oh, yeah, that changes as you change, as you age and gain experience in moss. Reading is so foundational to me. Some places I go just to experience and check off and test an artist's or writer's vision of a time or place. And that can be viewed as inspiration or curiosity. So for example, you can't go to Paris without having read Émile Zola's Belly of Paris if you're into food. And you can't go to Cuba without having read Our Man in Havana by Graham Greene. If you only know a pretty picture on Instagram, you're going in so hobbled. So I would urge any thinking traveler to go back in time and read the classics, see what's still there,
Yeah, I have that exact same thought on travel, but the downside for me is that sometimes if there's somewhere completely brand new that I've never been, I almost delay going because I know how much reading I'll want to do in the lead up. I'm like,
I get it.
I don't know if I have time to read all these books. So speaking of books, this is a hard question for you. We could just talk for an hour, just straight up about books, but I would love to know. I don't know, man. I don't even know how to ask this question, but what are some, if you had to recommend some must reads, like books that you must read in your life to have led a complete life? Say you're a creative, artistic kind of person, a curious, wants to see the world, wants to have adventures broadly. Are there any books that for you or must reads?
Yeah, that's that last clause is important for you, because I would never deign, not knowing the person in question, to suggest what would work for them. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you what worked for me.
Please.
And that would include a book called The Eyelids of Morning by Peter Beard and his compatriot photographer. And his documents the year Mr. Beard worked as a crocodile researcher on the shores of a lake in Kenya on the Somalian border.
Oh, wow.
And it's remarkable in its prescience and kind of biblical classicism. So The Eyelids of Morning would be one. And I'm always enraptured by food. Always have been, from my days as a restaurant employee to a self-styled cook myself. And classical food reading, from Escoffier to Zola to more recently, until his passing, the food writing of Jim Harrison, as seen in his roundup book called The Raw and the Cooked. That is a 10-star volume. There's two. The other might be one I'm reading right now, because I'm going to the Colombian Amazon in a week, and I wanted to read some Amazonian history, and I was given a copy of Teddy Roosevelt's Through the Brazilian Wilderness.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really excited. I'm into that right now.
There's a good one called the River of Doubt by Candace Millard that is focused exclusively on that expedition and how crazy it was. And that's I think reading the firsthand source is definitely the way to go. But if you're looking for more, I'm obsessed with Theodore Roosevelt. And when people always say, like, what's one TR book I should read? River of Doubt is the number one that I recommend. So,
okay, great.
I'm sure you have plenty of other books to read, though. Well, that's exciting. What are you doing down there? What's that trip about?
It's funny. I'm looking for a fish that can clear the water, and known for taking out juvenile monkeys from the overhanging branches of the Rio Orinoco. I asked a fishing friend, how do you do such a thing? And he said, without missing a beat, lie bait. So you can do the math. So
that's going to be an adventure.
Yeah, no, I hope so. Not too much. And the reason number two is peacock bass.
Oh, nice.
So it's a fishing trip, hiding behind adventure. And this will be a chapter in a future effort.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah. I'll look forward to that. All right. I've taken enough of your time here, but to wrap it up, you've just established this, you just built up this amazing life, and you've had so many rich experiences, both, fun and the ultra challenging and everything in between. And I just feel like you're just a real thoughtful guy and curious and humble, and there's just so much to offer. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to put it out in this amazing book that I'll have links to, obviously, in the notes. But any kind of final words into anything I missed, anything I said that was really, really stupid that you want to scold me for? Any final word?
I would advise fellow writers to learn earlier what I just learned in the James Salter book title. It's called Don't Save Anything. And in the process of writing, don't be precious and hide away favored phrases or authors or notes or references. Use it all right now, because that trains the muscle of your mind to restock.
I like that. And that's very helpful, as I've been struggling through my own writing process and putting way too much thought into it, and just playing all these games with my brain. And
don't we all?
That's very helpful. So, well, man, this was awesome. I know you've got so much going on, but I really, really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat. And like I said, your work has meant a lot to me over the years. And so the fact that I finally get to talk with you, it means more than you probably realize. But I hope you have a safe trip down south, and many, many, many more safe trips to come. But I hope we can hang out in person one of these days.
It was great, and you're far, far too kind. And I look forward to diving deeper into your oeuvre of podcast and past work.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.